Hey guys, welcome back. So now, getting into our talks of Peter David's Maestro War Pax, it really feels like the continuation of that future imperfect origin that Maestro just wouldn't want anybody to know. But then you take that and you add a bit of that saying like when people get old, they stop caring what people think about them, and at that point old people just say and do what they want to do. So it's like that philosophy but hulked out in a dystopian future leading to future imperfect. And following Maestro 2020, War Pax, it now takes us into the new structure of how Maestro wants everything to run. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so after we had wrapped up with like Maestro 2020, and we had seen everything play out with Maestro taking the throne from Hercules, and in retrospect we see that series had like two objectives for the most part, with one showing us how Maestro came into power, as underhanded as it may have been, but then on top of that showing us why, with us seeing him escape the deception, and in the blink of an eye his entire world changes from what he thought was normal into this dystopian future where mankind has pretty much ruined everything, which is why Maestro's message to the world is like, give me that before you poke your eye out with it. Like rulership, all of it. And it's here where we pick up with War Pax to where he's just making his way out and expanding and taking over other territories. And when we pick up here, we start off with this group called the Stalkers, who are out in Hartford, Connecticut. And at this point in the future, they've taken over and they run like what's left in this area. But when we pick up with them here, they're scouting out for Maestro, because recently Maestro had sent out an emissary to more or less let them know that he's coming to take over. And with these guys having the expectation that Maestro is coming, like they know it's not going to go well. And it's probably because when Maestro sent the emissary to go tell them in Connecticut that Maestro was taking over, the Stalkers then sent back the emissary's head on a stick. So when they did that, they knew good and well that they needed to get ready. And like with them scoping out the direction from which they know that Maestro is coming from, first they lose communication with one of their scouts, and then this big trail of dust stampeding in, which soon they identify as the Dogs of War. Like seeing that alone lets them know that Maestro is coming. But with the Dogs of War kicking up all the dust, the lookout couldn't see Maestro, and then boom, Maestro just lands right in front of him. And when he gets there, like Maestro, he could have easily just destroyed these dudes, because as far as defenses, they don't really have any firepower that could stagger a hoe. And when Maestro gets there, the commander's terrified for one, and he's screaming hysterically for them to open fire, to which the rest of the Stalkers do. But when they do, like Maestro with a soft tone, he's like, oh no, that's not how you give an order to kill someone, because when you're screaming, you sound terrified, you sound scared. And from there, he just tells the Dogs of War, kill them, do it. And I mean, he didn't say the do it part, but I got some Palpatine vibes just then, I don't know why. But after this, he then checks in with like the pilots from the Dogs of War, and it's here where we see this is like kind of like where we get this breakdown of how he conquers these other territories, with first sending a messenger saying that he's going to take over, and then when that doesn't go well, he just goes over there and takes over. But then you also have the case of the Stalkers, to where they're more than just like a militant group, they're a community. And within that community, you got kids, to where some of which with their parents fell fighting against the Dogs of War. And with those kids that were left over, Maestro was kind of like, ease up, like we're not monsters. So he then went over to talk to the kids, in doing so kind of like, hey, I'm Maestro, but you can call me Bruce. And the kid's first response was like, hey man, did you kill your parents? And he told the kids like that his parents killed themselves by fighting against him. Like he slick said that his parents killed themselves by fighting against him. But he offers them the opportunity to come with him back to dystopia, but they spit in his face, tell him go to hell. And after that, Maestro just goes to the pilot and he tells him, man, do whatever y'all was gonna do. And Maestro legit just had a bump them kids moment. It's kind of like, man, like I don't even know who you are right now. But even with seeing that, it really just solidifies like what Rick Jones expressed with saying how far that banner had gone. And with Rick's speech of the son becoming the father, because it was more like something we would see Brian Banner do. But when Maestro gets back, he talks to the minister and he lets him know like he's come to the realization more or less to where he knows that he can't just approach people with just the idea of just taking over unless he offers it within a package that seems like it's something that the people had already wanted. And he gives the example of comparing it to JFK putting a man on the moon, which prior to nobody asked for, but 7 years after the announcement, it was done. And really just regardless of it being a race for the US to beat the Soviet Union, but rather Maestro's coming up with a way to take his own ideal and model after that focus and that determination, just to make the people believe that both him and them want the same thing. And the way that he says that this needs to be brought forth is through a political movement. But like as they go inside to discuss it further, the ladies come rushing towards him and he's like, not now. And I imagine like Uchiwali was on repeat and the DJ just took the needle off the record. And I bet like that's the song that Maestro wants playing every time he walks in. Like he has somebody in his palace that plays that song on repeat day and night. Or at least that's what I imagine is just playing all the time. But in this case, this time he just wasn't in the mood. But when Maestro mentioning that he wants to do this in the way of a political movement, initially the minister's like, wait, you want Democrats and Republicans? But then Maestro's like, nah, that's long dead, we need a new movement. And from there, Maestro tells the minister that he has the perfect name, with it being post-apocalyptic existence, being Pax for short. And from there, of course, the minister agrees, because what's he gonna do? But he tells Maestro then it at least has a ring to it, with Pax being the Latin word for peace. And in that way, with convincing people to get under his rule, now it's like they're swearing under an ideal than just to him. But even still, like if they say no, the other option is death. But at this point, the minister's not really sure as far as like where else they would take this, because the previous methods which Maestro had used, they had already used on the remaining stalkers, and aside from the wasteland farmers, the minister really didn't know anyone else to go for. But then Maestro's like, nope, Washington DC, that's the next target. I went there, I seen the machine man, they got all kind of supplies and stuff we can use, like that is definitely the next target. And the minister's like, okay, cool. And he's like, who we sending this time to go out there? And Maestro just gives him this look like, it's funny you'd ask. But back over in Hartford, Connecticut, which like we seen earlier has totally been wasted, but at this time we see a drone flying over, taking a look at the aftermath, showing us at least that this has been brought to someone's attention. But over in Washington DC, the minister, he goes to speak to the machine man over at Haven, and he literally just strolls in like the same way that Maestro had inadvertently found. But of course the minister had made it so far and then he was escorted by security. But when he gets here, the machine man recognizes him from Dystopia, since he's been monitoring their activities from afar. But with seeing him here, Machine Man didn't necessarily know his name, so he's like, hey, what's your name? And the minister's like, the minister. And Machine Man's like, that's not a name, man. Like, my name is Aaron Stack, like, what is your name? And the minister just kind of stares at him for a second, he's like, Ralph. And he almost looked like it hurt to admit his actual name, like he swore on his life no one would ever know. And I guess that's what happens when you get fancy. You don't want a regular name, you just want to go by the minister. It's like, all right, Ralph. But after getting acquainted with Ralph, or the minister, and he makes it clear pretty early that he's representing Maestro. But with speaking to him further, Machine Man then takes him deeper into Haven, towards the central hall. But at this point, the small talk's kind of over. And Machine Man asks him like, why are you actually here? And don't lie, because Machine Man's monitoring his vitals, so he'll pick it up if the minister is trying to be crafty with him. But the minister's pretty straightforward. He tells him like, Maestro's on his way, and he's coming to rule all of you guys. And Machine Man is kind of like, wait, what? And extends this boom mic like straight from his finger so that everyone within Central Hall could hear what the minister said. And he tells the minister to say it again, and the minister's kind of thrown off because there's a bit of latency within the PA system, and I guess he's kind of hearing himself for the first time on that kind of setup. But as he tells them like everything else going into more detail, we then jump over to Maestro, who's taking a ferry, because as the minister is giving this announcement, Maestro is on his way to give the further details of his conditions, and of course if they don't agree to his terms, then they're just subject to be destroyed, which in execution isn't too different from Maestro's previous plan. And really the only difference with the Pax, or the post-apocalyptic existence, or like that ideal, is that now it has a bit of branding on top of it. But ideally it's his way. But when Machine Man hears this, he's like kind of like, okay, we kind of been expecting this, and he just tells the dudes like, man, it's happening. All right, everybody, it's happening. And from there, he calls for Operation Egress, which is like their contingency protocol for this situation specifically. Because for Machine Man and Haven monitoring Dystopia from Washington DC, like they had seen all the chaos that it went down, and they knew that it wasn't but a matter of time before Maestro would come for them, especially with him knowing so much about their secret operation, and Haven existing underground out of the sight of others. But then on top of this, we come to see that this has been brought to the attention of the Pantheon, who's like this group that's comprised of descendants of Agamemnon, and they're made aware of Maestro's actions by way of Delphi, who has the ability of precognition, as well as like other moderate abilities that most of these guys have. And when I say moderate abilities, I mean like moderate super strength, slow aging, or higher than average durability. But aside from that, you have members of the Pantheon whose gifts do stand out. But one of the more significant things about the Pantheon, at least from what I remember, because at this point we going back to the early 90s again, getting into the deep cuts, and it was either late 80s, early 90s, like somewhere around there. But one of the things that was pretty big with the Hulk around issue 379, and I do mean generally around because it goes much deeper like around issue 381, but at the time with us having like your newly formed Professor Hulk, he had soon encountered this group called the Pantheon, who had fought the Hulk and then taken him in, and at the time Professor Hulk, he more or less let it happen so that with them taking him in, he can learn more about them. But also within their facility, which was like under a mountain in Nevada, but even inside they had all sorts of advanced technologies that was well beyond the technology known at the time, or for back then what was present day. But on top of them having their powers in these advancements, they were also vegetarians and they had advanced weaponry. But with Professor Hulk going to meet them at this time, Agamemnon had requested that the Hulk would join them, and literally like the dude said, you need to join us and do something with your life, because for the most part at the time, like their community or their thing was just avoiding disasters, because for the most part they would just observe and find a way to work around it. But with the Hulk joining them, it would be like their solution to taking him off the streets or out of the world, which is where, from what they stated, is like where he's been doing the most damage. So with getting the Hulk to join, it was like their solution to stopping the destruction which the Hulk was inflicting on mankind. And as a result, Professor Hulk, he did stick around for a while, but it didn't go too well. But with the Pantheon also becoming aware, and I say also like aside from other cloaked figure, but when they become aware of Bruce's return, they meet up and they then have a discussion. But when they do, Atalanta, or just Lanta, she tells them that they're not gonna do anything. And her argument is that their focus is more so on saving the world rather than just stopping Bruce. But back over in DC, Maestro, he makes his way into Haven, and when he does, the minister's like, oh thank God. I thought my head was going to end up on a stake, and he gets out of there like super quick. But when Maestro gets here, Machine Man hits him with all kind of tricks, like the go-go gadget legs, and the smoking mirrors, or the smoking holograms. And to Maestro, like the different tricks, like they're kind of amusing, but even still, it's pretty obvious like this isn't one of those fights that Machine Man is going to win. Because with Machine Man, like all he really has is like all the convenient technologies that he needs like built in. And especially like in this form, none of which are insanely powerful, or at least not to your level of like Hulk busting ability. Cause like he's tough but not that tough. But as they're going back and forth, the minister, he's made his way out, and he tells some of the troops like to stay and protect him because Maestro, like he'll be fine. But as it turns out, Machine Man had left Maestro to fight with a copy of himself, because the plan wasn't to fight and defeat Maestro, but rather it was just to fight and distract him, so that the Machine Man could evacuate everyone out of there and get them somewhere safe before his other copy, fighting the Maestro, had self-destructed. And for the Maestro, like more than the physical pain, it was more like an embarrassment for him to get suckered into another trap to where an old friend just tried to blow him up again and kill him. So when this happened, it was just kind of like, I don't want to hear nothing about it. But after this, we then go back over to the Pantheon, who once again haven't planned to do anything about Maestro. But when we go back over to them, Lanta is then called over to the monitor room because the Pantheon has a visitor who's demanding to be let in. And initially I thought it was going to be Machine Man making his way here, but even still, I'm not sure if Machine Man is aware of the Pantheon, let alone their location. But when we see who this mysterious visitor is, it is none other than the cloaked, shadowy figure, Dr. Doom. Alright, so when we jump back in, we pick up with like the cliffhanger, or better yet, the continuation from the cliffhanger. You don't pick up with the cliffhanger, what I'm talking about. But it's here where we pick up with the visitor who had came to see the Pantheon, who we had seen before was Dr. Doom. And originally when he gets there, Lanta, she instructs the others to like just ignore him and he'll go away. But at the same time, this is Doom that we're talking about, so the fact that he found them was a great feat within itself. But with Lanta just telling the others to ignore him and he'll go away, like initially it's quiet for a little bit, but then before you know it, Doom just teleports inside of their base. And immediately when it happens, there's like this, okay, well that didn't work kind of vibe in the air. But then when Doom just appears on the inside and Hector is like, okay Victor, well you just use some teleportation device of some sort, and Doom's just kind of like, yeah, more or less. But with Hector continuing to call Dr. Doom just Victor, Doom then reminds Victor that it's either Doom or Dr. Doom. And it takes a bit of a funny turn because Hector is then like, well, do you have a medical degree or a doctorate of some sort? And when he says that, Doom is just quiet for a minute and he just looks at him. And then he just blasts Hector right into the wall. Like, but Doom didn't come here for for a fight, but he ain't come here to explain himself either. But even with this happening, Lanta then asks Doom like what is it exactly that he wants, and he simply lets her know, just tea and chat, just reiterating that he simply just wants to talk. And so now moments later, once the tension has died down and Hector still in his feelings, but then it's here where Doom tells the Pantheon like for one how he's here and not like 150 years old, and he lets him know simply that he's made his way here through time travel. But then also with him expressing to the Pantheon that he's aware of their reputation and what they stand for and their core ideal of making the world a better place, much like what we talked about in the last video, because at least that's where the Pantheon's direction had started. And even at this point, they're still that type of team, but even still, like there are some events that have taken place recently, which we'll get into more in a little bit, which have caused more of an internal conflict within the team. But even still, we'll see a bit of that unfold as we move forward. But with Doom bringing up the whole idea of the Pantheon's mission of world betterment, and in a very forward way, more or less telling them that they suck at it, you know, given the circumstance and the current state of the world. But even still, like in their defense, they never were like a superhero save the world type of team. And for the most part, at least from what I remember in the older issues, like their tactics were very passive. Like for instance, before, their solution for stopping the Hulk was pretty much inducting him into their team and then giving him training lessons. So Doom kind of got a point here, like either way you look at it. But with telling them this, Doom then lets them know that he's been monitoring this present time, and with doing so, the Maestro has come to his attention, which on one hand brought Doom to see the Pantheon, being that they teamed up with Banner at one point. But with him asking them about Maestro and them responding that they know, they more or less tell him that they don't know too much about him, when the truth is they've seen him and they decided not to deal with it. But then it also sparks the question of, with Doom, like why is he here and why does he care? Which in his case, he's very discreet with by telling them he's capricious, which more or less just means that when he arrived there, he had seen things that had caused him to feel different about the current state and situation. But Doom also lets him know, like as far as whatever they're going to do, they gotta handle it quick. Because if Maestro sees Doom with the Pantheon, immediately he's gonna picture them as his opponent. And through the course of running through different ideas, with one like killing him, that idea is shot down because he's immortal. And unlike the Pantheon, like the Hulk is immortal, and members of the Pantheon can actually die. But after this, they then come to the idea of reducing Maestro back to Banner, which in that case will at least give them something that they can work with. Because right now, with Maestro being the Hulk with the mind of Banner, the chances are slim. But if they can reduce him to Banner with the body of Banner, then they could at least lock him up and just constrain him instead. But then not long after this, we then jump over to Alchemex, which is one of the locations which Maestro's been using to produce his Dogs of War, and at this point he's using to rebuild more after that crazy explosion we had seen back in DC. And it's here where we see the Minister, who's come to summon Maestro, who initially is scared out of his wits when he's pounced on by one of the Dogs of War. But with the Minister coming up to this level, he's come here to summon Maestro because he has a visitor. And initially the Minister calls him like the Parthenon or something, but even with messing it up, Maestro immediately knows that he's talking about the Pantheon. But like now with the Minister telling Maestro like your friends are here to see you. But with doing so, it's like the Minister is like, are these really friends this time? Because like we've seen before, or the Minister, he's also seen prior to this point, that the Maestro, he kind of has this pattern of running into old friends to where every time, like at some point, they just try to kill him. But this time the Maestro assures him that the Pantheon, they are his actual friends and that he agrees to meet with them. And like at this point, like when we jump over to the throne, like I'm just glad that they brought in Ajax at this point, because with Ajax, like he's really strong, but he's not that bright. And because of that, it really makes for some fun and just humorous moments. Because while they're waiting on Maestro, Ajax then asks one of the guards like, hey, can I sit in the throne? And the guard is like, yeah, I wouldn't do that if I was you. And Ajax is like, well, are you me? And the guard's like, no. And Ajax is just really trying to make sense out of it. And like telling the guard like, okay, since you not me, can I sit down in it? And the guard just says the same thing. Like, you know, like I wouldn't. And Ajax is like, okay. But what about me though? And it's really like a facepalm moment to the rest of the team, but I enjoy these Ajax moments because he's never really been the type of character who is written to be taken serious. But with him going back and forth with the guard, Maestro then shows up, and immediately it turns into a brawl between Ajax and Maestro. And like immediately when this happened, like I had initially thought that Ajax, he just picked back up with fighting the Hulk like in the late 80s, early 90s, because back then, Ajax was either trying to protect Lanta or Ulysses from Professor Hulk, whether one time or another. But really here, we come to find out that it was just Maestro's entrance that startled him, which very much felt like an attack, but it wasn't. But even with this happening, Lanta steps in, she calms down Ajax, and from here, Maestro invites them to feast and more or less just catch up. But it's here where they then tell the Maestro, like, for one, the mound, their head base and location, like, since it was destroyed, they had relocated in Canada. And I'll say, like, prior to this point, I thought they were still located in Nevada. So that's an update, Pantheon's in Canada. But then while they're here catching up, Lanta, she then asks Maestro, like, what's the whole deal with the Pax thing? And Maestro lets him know, pretty straightforward, post-apocalyptic existence, and as long as everyone does what he says, they live in peace. And for the Pantheon, who's hearing this from his mouth for the first time, they're pretty quiet, and they kind of look at each other for a moment, and then they just look at him like, oh yeah, that's great, yeah, great, just sign me up. And Ajax ain't even paying attention, he just enjoying the food. But then it's here with Lanta, she tells Maestro that this idea sounds great and all, but he's probably gonna have a problem with AIM. And when she tells this to Maestro and she asks him, like, are you familiar with AIM? At that point, Maestro just kind of like, am I? And from there, he goes on to give them a bit of history, letting them know, like, AIM is the reason why he's here right now. Because of MODOK, who had him in hypersleep for so long, at least to the moment where he woke up and broke out. And like, with trying to be slick and ask for Maestro a bit more information from Maestro, Lanta then asks him, like, how did you get out? And from there, Maestro's just more or less like, if I want to leave somewhere, I'ma go. Which is a bit self-explanatory within its own right. But then after this, he goes on to tell them that he had met Vapor while he was in there, and later on he had called for her services. But when they ask what sort of services did she provide, like what did he need, he then brushes over it like, oh, that don't matter, like that's neither here or there. Which really goes to show us early on, like on many sides there are people holding information which they really just don't want others to know. And even up to this point, it's building tension like within the different groups, and we'll talk about how that plays out in just a minute. But at this point with Lanta expressing to Maestro that the Pantheon is on his side and also that they're in agreement with Pax, it's here where Maestro then asks her, like, what exactly is it that she wants with AIM? And her response is that AIM killed Prometheus, who prior to this point was a former member of the Pantheon. And with hearing this, Maestro's then like, you come to the right place, we both have a common enemy, and with that being the case, let's just do what needs to be done. But after this, when Maestro goes with them and boards on their ship, at first he questions the ship because it's pretty small, and Lantum lets him know, like, oh, don't worry about it, we got bunker busters, like we'll open up AIM and then you lead the way. And so then when Lanta, she sets the course, Maestro has a seat, and he then asks, like, okay, well, how exactly did Prometheus die? And quickly, Lanta responds like, I don't want to talk about it. And when she says that, Maestro kind of gives her the side eye like, really? But then immediately, Maestro turns around to Ajax and he's like, how did Prometheus die? Go! And immediately Ajax was just like, he got sick and it was sad. Like, Ajax just blew their cover just like that. But with Maestro being aware that he's being lied to, he knows immediately now that this is a setup. And right after Ajax had told the truth, Maestro had then grabbed Lanta by the neck and he demands that the others tell him what's going on because Lanta is pretty much a thumbs up away from meeting her maker. But with Maestro telling them to come clean or else, Ulysses then tells Maestro, more or less, that they don't need to do anything because he's gonna put her down. Which is exactly what happens because when Lanta was setting the course, she had also activated a knockout gas that could take out a herd of whales, which effectively worked, compliments of Dr. Doom. But as far as the Pantheon, they weren't affected because each of them were wearing nose filters the whole time. But with doing this, they've effectively captured Maestro, and from here they inform Doom, and with doing so, Lanta lets them know that now it's time to head into phase 2. But before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about like the true story of Prometheus, or like what happened to him, because we start to get glimpses of his story, which had taken place not long after all the nuclear explosions had wiped out a majority of the world. But after this had happened, like when we had seen the rise of the group called the Black Scythe, who had more or less had like the Grim Reaper as their mascot, and I mean it makes sense, it's in the name, Black Scythe. But also we had seen that they attacked a number of cities with poisonous gas, but years ago in the case of the Pantheon, this was seen by Delphi, and when she had seen this and they had sent Prometheus out, he was then infected and he died. And it was really his death that made things kind of volatile for the team immediately after, because with Delphi seeing her premonition of the Black Scythe, she didn't see the poisonous gas, and because of that Prometheus went in unprepared, and not to mention like his last words was like, this is your fault, and Delphi has to live with that. But then the next thing we see right after this, like right after Prometheus had died, it was then Lanta given the instructions that the Pantheon would hunt down every last member of the Black Scythe in order to achieve vengeance from them killing one of her own. But from here we'll have to wait and see how exactly that panned out, because for now it's only letting us know like what happened to the team. Alright, so in our last talk, we had seen how Dr. Doom had went to the Pantheon, warning them of the threat of Maestro, and also soliciting their assistance in dealing with this threat within this timeline that Doom has entered. And although the execution of their plan was kinda shaky, because that moment where Ajax spilled the beans, I thought it was a wrap. But even with their turbulence within the execution of said plan, they still pulled it off. But one of the things that they didn't account for was like, even with Maestro in his sleep state, he was still in his hulked out form. But like, for us as the reader, this is something we kind of knew was coming, because we'd seen him like this in the previous series, Maestro 2020, when MODOK was keeping him at the AIM facility and Banner was hulked out within his stasis. But even with that, there is the possibility that he could have gone back and forth between Hulk and Banner within stasis throughout the course of that 100 years. But even if that's the case, AIM had fitted his stasis pod to hold the Hulk and he still got out. But then fast forward to now, with the Pantheon bringing Maestro back to their new mountain location, they had expected Maestro to turn back into Banner, because even when Lanta had asked Maestro like how did he escape AIM, he didn't tell her. He was just like, when he's ready to leave somewhere, he'll leave. So this definitely brought them some concern, but then also a bit of urgency, like what do we do now? And even like Hector makes the suggestion to keep Maestro like this indefinitely, but that in itself presents a problem because they don't want this mound to blow up like the last one in the event that Maestro wakes up, let alone being caught in the blast and killed in the process. And this then leads Ulysses to suggest that they go inside of his mind and find a way to turn him back into Banner so they can kill him, which immediately just has me thinking like, I don't know about that, Chief. But then Delphi is just kind of like, okay, I'll get him to do it, I'll talk to him. And the him that she's referring to is fellow member of the Pantheon, Paris, aka Nathan Taylor. And in his case, his powers are immortality like the others, well, at least like to the extent of living long, but also like the others to where everyone has like their one special gift. In his case, he's an empath, which essentially allows him to reach out and get a reading on others. But at this current state far into the future, Nathan's empathic abilities, they've evolved, allowing him to communicate, which then make him like an entry-level telepath. But also with Delphi reaching out to Paris to go into Maestro's mind, she's approaching him to ask him to do this because she knows for a long time that he's had feelings for her. And it's because of that, when she goes to approach Paris, she finds him in the pool, she sweet talks him, she gives him a kiss, and she easily convinces him to do it. And I mean, like, there was a brief moment to where Paris was like, well, Delphi, why can't you do it? Like, you have telepathy now too. But she told him that she didn't want to do it because it felt too invasive. But at the end of the day, she sweet talked him and manipulated him, and he fell for it. And while Lanta's hooking him up to the machine, he's just like, I hate this so much. But so now with like reluctantly doing this, Paris then enters the mind of Maestro. And when he does, he calls Maestro Dr. Banner. And at first, Maestro doesn't respond, but when he eventually does respond, he tells Paris that I'm not Banner, I'm Maestro. And with doing this, like, Maestro's early establishing like the whole mind trick thing, like, I've been there, done that. And in the case of Maestro, with the way that he was manipulated like this for so long, like, the tactic within itself is offensive to him. But even with this happening, like, Paris tries to start him off easy and he brings him somewhere that he's familiar with making it seem like he's at the old mountain location, which is where Maestro had joined the Pantheon back when he was Professor Hulk, and he was shown like how destructive he was in his previous years as the Hulk, which was kind of the method at the time to get him to join. And Paris uses a very similar tactic to what Agamemnon had used years ago. But even though Maestro knows that this is all fake, he still entertains the conversation that Nathan's bringing him. But then it's here where he brings Maestro into a room that seems very much like the same room that he was brought into when he was Professor Hulk, and he tells Maestro that back at the time when the Pantheon had expressed interest in him because he had merged personalities, Paris now tells Maestro that this was a lie. And the truth that they want Maestro to know now is that they've been watching him for much longer than that. And it's here where Paris shows Maestro on the screen the moment where his mother tried to leave with him as a child and his father killed her, which was a vision that was perceived through Delphi's mother, Andromeda. And for the record, the vision just seems way crazier than what I remember. But any way you look at it, it's still murder. And Maestro is triggered to the 10th power when he sees this. And frankly, like, he could care less about the story of the vision which Andromeda had seen in whatever narrative it was that Paris was trying to express here. Because to Maestro, it just seems like these guys are trying to play some kind of sick game with his mind. And because of that, Maestro smashes the screen and he chokes the War Pax out of Paris. And immediately when this happens, Lanta, she's going off. She's like, disconnect the feed, hurry up, get him out of there. But before you know it, it's not even an issue anymore because Maestro, he just disconnected the man from life. So in that case, it's like problem solved, because he's out of there. But then right after that, Maestro's eyes then open, and Lanta immediately calls for the others, telling them that Banner's awake, which triggers him even more because they keep calling him Banner. And I mean, like, the man just wants you to acknowledge the new name, that's all. And I mean, like, aside from that, he wants you to live under his new world order. But I mean, it's not really a long list of requests, just a couple things that he asked for, that's all. But then as soon as Maestro breaks out, Ulysses, he jumps in, he tells Lanta to fall back, and he cuts off Maestro's hand. But it isn't an issue for long because, for one, Maestro has another hand, and Ulysses saw the back of it up close like very soon after. But also with this happening, Maestro, he then goes over and picks up his right hand, and he just puts it right back on. But also in this moment, Maestro notices that Ulysses' sword, it's stronger in this moment than what he remembers. Which for Maestro, that must mean that Ulysses has made improvements to it over the years. And if that's the case, like if it can go through a Hulk, then it can go through Ulysses like a hot knife through butter. And it pretty much does. And right after, Lanta lets off on Maestro with her plasma bow, but it does little to nothing and he keeps charging at her. But just before Maestro can get to Lanta, Ajax shows up. And Maestro, he even lets Ajax know, like, he feels sorry for Ajax the most. And it really just comes from Ajax being like the big dumb brute, and Maestro can relate to that because he was that guy at one point. But also with Ajax stepping in here to protect Lanta, like we've talked about on this playlist before, like how protective Ajax is of Lanta, and Maestro has seen and known that for years. And because of that, it is here where Maestro breaks the savage meter and he lifts up Ajax, throws him directly at Lanta, and crushes her. And it's like, yo, the physical and mental devastation here. Like, it really feels like a part of Ajax just died on the inside right now. But then immediately after this, we then get the appearance of Rebecca Banner, Bruce's mother, who just shows up fresh after Bruce's killing spree. And when she does, she just witnesses in devastation all that Bruce has become. And initially, Maestro doesn't believe it because he knows that his mother's dead, but that doesn't change the fact that he would never want his mother to see him become this monster of sorts so similar to his father. And with him seeing his mother in tears, he turns back into Banner, and then he's immediately shot multiple times by his mother. And it's here where we quickly realize that this entire time that this whole thing was part of the plan. Maestro had never broke out, and none of the members of the Pantheon were harmed in the production of this illusion, if you will. But then also, like, at no point did Maestro truly break through the influence that Paris had created, but instead he was in containment the entire time, and as soon as Maestro turned back into Banner, Paris clapped him. But even with this being the case, the Pantheon, they know that Bruce, his immortality is set up a little bit different, and because he is immortal, now they had to find the next step to figure out how to make his death permanent, which I'm very much looking forward to, and mainly because I'm hoping to see some Immortal Hulk-like references when they attempt to pull this off. But then also, like, this was pretty much what I was referring to, with like what appears to be like the slow build up of the Maestro becoming worse and worse, which initially we saw through his friends attacking him and attempting to kill him, which definitely is what we got here again. But in this case, I didn't call it a hunch, but I think it hit a little deeper this time. And as a result, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the Maestro that came back a little harder than what we had seen before. And I'm talking about like with some make your dreams come true type energy. Oh, and before I forget, like, okay, since this whole thing was like an illusion, like, one thing I can't help but think is that if this all wasn't real, one, was the Pantheon able to watch this play out like on the big screen? And if they did Ajax see this part? Because if Ajax had to watch that, I highly suggest that somebody go check on that guy. Alright, so jumping back into Maestro War Pax, like when we had last left off, the Pantheon had led Maestro to believe that he had successfully escaped by destroying all of these guys, and with doing so revealing himself to be the monster that Maestro truly is, which is exactly what they wanted him to lean into in order to show him the illusion of his mother seeing it all so that he could turn back into Banner to put him in a weakened state so that they could kill him and find a way from there to put him down for good. But while they're prepping for the next stage, we also got to keep in mind that they're working with Dr. Doom on this. And at this time, Doom has made his way over to Dystopia to deliver what he believes to be the remedy now that Maestro's out of the picture, which at this point, of course, is him taking over Dystopia as their new leader. And at this point, like, for the people of Dystopia, like, this is something that they see every day. And like, not literally every day, but it happens a lot. And when Doom arrives here, attempting to make this announcement, demanding the respect of these people. Like at this point, they're completely over it. Because before it was Hercules, at one point it was Maestro, now this guy. And when Doom arrives demanding their obeisance, they're just like, look, nah bruh, like we not about to do this again. And initially Doom, he's like, well maybe I should slaughter a few, get some attention, and then after that perhaps the others will fall in line. But then he's like, nope, I'm gonna do something different this time, because that approach would just be way too predictable. And with knowing this, he just heads straight for the throne. And it's funny because when he knocks on the door, like the minister answers and he's more or less like, can I help you? And when Doom responds like, I'm your new ruler, the minister responds back to him like he's a door-to-door salesman. He's like, nope, we already got one. And very much like, we're good here, like keep it moving. But when Doom more or less just lets himself in, because honestly, like the minister's not gonna stop him. But when Doom lets himself in, he lets the minister know like, you had a leader, he's out the way now. And he informs the minister that the Pantheon have taken Maestro captive. And like with hearing this, initially the minister has this skepticism of Maestro even being captured in the first place. But eventually within the conversation, he entertains the idea and he tells Doom like, even with that being the case, no one can hold this guy. Eventually he will return and he will come back for his throne. And Doom doesn't brush it over. He lets him know like he may be right. But until then, he's setting up shop. Because until that happens, Doom very much has every intention on continuing to pursue his interests within this timeline. But then at this time, we then go back to the Pantheon, who have decided to submerge and seal Bruce's body in duranium, which is usually a liquid that is mixed with alloys to create armor or fortify armor, but it's not as durable as adamantium per se. But for the Pantheon, like with the time given, this was the toughest substance that they had, so they just figured, hey, we'll lock him in here, and that way he'll be stuck, he can't grow, he can't get out. And with doing this, like this idea didn't sit too well with Ulysses, because Ulysses just told Lanta like, hey, he's gonna break out of that and he's gonna kill us all. And Lanta, like she's aware that that's a possibility, but with them not knowing how Bruce's immortality works, they had to make a decision because the clock was ticking. But even with this being the call, like Ulysses, he did suggest that they cut him into pieces and just separate like his head from his arms, his legs, and the rest of his body, which by the way, if they did, like we already know how that would play out, because like we had seen in Immortal Hulk issue 8, this immortality of the Hulk, which the Pantheon has mentioned that they still haven't fully figured out, but like we've seen what it can do prior to this point, because when Shadowbase tried to test these limits, at that time the Devil Hulk allowed it, and even with his different limbs and organs collected in different jars, with the snap of a finger he was able to break the glass and reassemble himself when he was ready. And because of that, we know what would happen if the Pantheon had taken that route. But the Pantheon, they have no knowledge of this happening, and of course, because that was Shadowbase. But with Ulysses making the suggestion to cut the Hulk into pieces, Lanta shoots the idea down. And not because she knows what'll happen, but she assumes that if they cut Maestro into different pieces, those pieces could each become a different Maestro, and after that, you then have an army of Maestros that you gotta deal with. And Ulysses tells her like that wouldn't happen. But when Lanta asks Ulysses like, would you bet your life on it? He just lets it go in fear of that being a possibility. But then it's after this where we then go into Bruce's mind, to where he's being counseled by Doc Samson, who tells Bruce what the Pantheon is doing, with submerging him in duranium to the point of when it solidifies, he likely won't be able to get out. And when Bruce hears this and he asks like, what can he do about it? Like, can he stop them? And from there, Doc Samson flips it to the question of, do you want to stop them? Making it seem as if this is a gift or an opportunity to relieve Bruce from his suffering. And with presenting it this way, Doc Samson then asks him like, how much do you really want to live? And Bruce pauses and he thinks about it, but then Maestro steps in. And when Maestro shows up to this session, more or less, like he's pissed. And the first thing he does is go off on Bruce, telling him like, as soon as you saw your mother, suddenly a lifetime of inadequacy just rears its head. And it's very much like Maestro feels like he handed Bruce the moment and Bruce just completely fumbled it because he's weak. And Maestro tells Bruce like, you need to listen to what I've been telling you, which is you're better than Samson, you're better than your parents, and you're better than anyone who's quote unquote been trying to help you, because their help has only made you weaker. Like, look where we are now. And for that reason, don't listen to this Samson figure, because it doesn't even matter if it's really him or not, because the truth is we're in a situation where the Pantheon is trying to end you. And because of that, it doesn't matter what these other people are trying to say, whether it's Samson, the Pantheon, or whoever, because they don't care. And Maestro lets him know that he is the one person who does care. And with telling this to Bruce, he just snaps Doc Samson's neck with one hand and just discards him to the side. But then not too far away with the Pantheon, Lanta and Ulysses, they go back to the others to let them know that it's done, and they are nervous, like asking all kind of questions. But Lanta assures them that she's confident that he's secure, and they've given him an air hole so he can breathe, but she's confident that this is taken care of and it's done. But then going back into Bruce's mind, like it's just him and Maestro within this conversation now. And Maestro tells Bruce here, like everyone that he's met, whether it was Betty, the Avengers, Rick Jones, like they all have been afraid of Bruce because of what he could potentially do. And it's here where Maestro tells Bruce to release him, to put his trust in him, and put all the responsibility in Maestro's hands. And with doing this, he'll show them who's in charge and who's the strongest one there is. And this is a scary concept, because even though Maestro's strength has been known to be stagnant in the past, or like we know he's not the type of Hulk to where the madder he gets, the stronger he gets. But even with that being the case, what we do know is like any other Hulk, his ability or his power set are subject to change depending on his relationship with Bruce. But as soon as he says this, Maestro then breaks out of the Duranium, which for one immediately gives us Bruce's answer. But then on top of that, when Maestro breaks out, like he is much bigger than the Maestro that we'd seen leading up to this point. And when this happens, everyone at the Mount, like they immediately notice, and they're pretty sure what's about to happen from here, like it's not gonna be good. But then when Maestro busts out of the Duranium, the alarms start going off and the Pantheon, they come rushing back in. And when they rush back, like Ulysses, he just had to give Lanta the I told you so. But when they come rushing back to this new Maestro, he's just tearing through the place looking for the missile room, and when the Pantheon run into him, he immediately snatches up Lanta. And when this happened, like I expected like the next few panels just to be him running through kill count after kill count, like making his dreams come true from the last issue, if you will. But instead, when he sees the Pantheon, he just wants them to keep their word. And of course, with him snatching Lanta, Ajax comes in, but he's quickly just swatted to the side like it's nothing. But when this happens, immediately Ulysses is like, look, okay, I'll do what I said I was going to do, because their prior agreement with Maestro was to hit AIM with their bunker buster missiles. And at this time when Ulysses agrees to do it and everyone's trying to tell him don't, including Lanta, he's like he doesn't have a choice, he has to hold up his side of the agreement. And when Maestro asks Lanta like, is she afraid to die? She tells Maestro no, because she believes that herself and the Pantheon deserve to die, because ultimately they failed at their mission with protecting the world, with allowing it to get as bad as it has. And with hearing that, Maestro just like, okay, cool, your call. And he just kills Lanta in cold blood, like with no thought to it. And when he does this, like a surprisingly calm Ulysses, he tells Maestro like he knew he was gonna kill Lanta anyway. And it was for that reason when he sent the missiles, he sent out 2 different sets. And with doing so, the first barrage was heading towards the AIM facility like he said he would. And when this happens, like MODOK, he sees them coming. And when all the AIM researchers are like, what do? And MODOK is just like, we die. And I'm pretty sure that ain't what they wanted to hear. But even with saying this, MODOK tells them that they will be avenged. And with this happening, that is ironic that after all these years, they become the Avengers. But as for the second set of missiles which Ulysses had sent out, he had targeted them for his own location. And with doing this, it wasn't like an attempt for him to try to kill Maestro, because he had told Maestro where the second set was going, or coming in this case. But with him doing this, it was practically him and the Pantheon ending themselves because they had failed at their mission protecting the world. And with them having no solution to Maestro, they chose death rather than to serve under him. But after this, when Maestro returning back to Dystopia, he kinda already knows that he's a force to be reckoned with, because AIM couldn't hold him, neither could the Pantheon, and now in this world, or what's left of it, he sees himself as the ultimate power. Like nothing can stop this guy. And he assumes that his people see him the same way, but when he gets back and one of the locals are like, oh, you're back. And he just tells them like, of course I'm back, who said I wouldn't be? And everyone just points to his castle and they say him. Which we knew from the last issue it was Doom, but when Maestro returns to Dystopia and he like kicks in the door and yells Doom, it's really just for show, and we'll talk about how in just a little bit. Because when Maestro gets here, like Doom, who has very much made himself at home, and I love what he's done with the place. But when Maestro gets here, the first thing we see that's kind of like, what's going on? And that first thing is that Doom is expecting Maestro's return. And with seeing his return, he casually greets him as Doctor, kind of just like, let's get something to eat. And it's here where we find out that both Maestro and Doom, they had a pre-arranged agreement. Because when Doom asks if their plan worked out perfectly, and Maestro's like, yes, but they threw a couple curveballs trying to play with my mind. And when Doom asks him like how exactly, and Maestro's like, don't matter, they failed. And it's pretty crazy, like finding out that Doom set up the Pantheon by working with Maestro this whole time. And it really makes you think like, man, the Pantheon's defeat was delivered through death by okie doke. Like Doom truly finessed them into the grave. But with this happening, Doom then asks about AIM, and Maestro lets him know like, yeah, they done too. And with getting rid of AIM and the Pantheon, like that was their collective goal, because those were the only two groups that could really contest them. And so with the two of them out of the way, Doom is then like, okay, now good, now we can unite and rule this world together. And Maestro's just like, okay, about that part. And then when Doom's like, what does that mean? Maestro then tells him it means your drink's poison. And immediately Doom just falls to the ground choking. And when this happens, Maestro, he's a bit disappointed, because when he used a similar trick on Hercules by way of vapor, that was different, because Hercules is just a strong guy on the outside who's regular on the inside. But with Doom being a genius, Maestro's surprised that he was able to defeat him this easily, and he expected Doom to have some type of preparation for this. And while Doom's on the ground, he tells him, I did. Because Doom knew that Maestro was gonna double cross him, so he just covered all his bases. And when he looks up, he just blasts Maestro clean out of the building. But in the case of Doom, like the way that he survived the poisoning, like he tells Maestro, like before he even swallowed a single bite, he took an antitoxin, because he just knew that Maestro was gonna put something in either the food or the drink. And like with seeing this, I just think in my mind like, okay, Doom going to eat with Maestro, he's like, okay, this guy's gonna poison me. And I don't know which poison it is, so I'm gonna take the cure for everything. And then you got Maestro on the other hand, who's probably talking to the cook, and he's telling them like, hey, put some poison in Doom's food. And the cook's like, which one? And Maestro's just like, all of them. And in my mind, that's just how like whatever poison with whatever antitoxin, like that's how they canceled out. And I mean, I could be off, but hey, trust no one. But after this, Doom, he continues to go at Maestro, and he hits him like with the power of 1,000 lightning storms. And when he does it, he's kind of like, well, how do you like that? But in return, Maestro is just unbothered. And it's in that moment where Doom just picks up like, hey, okay, this dude is not only strong, but he's stronger than any time that we fought before, which kind of hints at the indication of Maestro being stronger than your Professor Hulk or your Savage Hulk even, which wasn't necessarily the case when the last miniseries began. And this brings me like to my main thoughts, which I think about both of these Maestro series so far. Because from starting out from the beginning of the first Maestro series, Bruce was very much at your Professor Hulk or even your Savage Hulk level of strength. And it didn't go up or down, it didn't change when it seemed like he got madder, like it just stayed where it was until something deeply painful happened, which gave him another buff in size and strength, like the Pantheon playing with his mind and using his mother to try to trick him, which literally made Maestro bigger and stronger. And like at this point, this isn't what Doom is making his comparison off of. Like he's just comparing Hulk from many years back to the Hulk that he's facing now. But what I'm saying, like with Maestro, we're pretty much seeing that he's traded off like the ability to get stronger as he gets madder with the ability to just level up, and that new strength is just how strong he is all the time. And if you think about it, you can get angry and angrier. But on the flip side, when you're angry to the point where you're just done with something, you can't be more done with it. So with Maestro, it's almost like the deeper his resolve gets, the more power or strength that he has all the time, which I don't think Doom really knows yet, but he's gonna learn. But in the case of Doom, like after dodging that counter from Maestro, Maestro then leaps at him, and Doom just catches him in mid-jump and tosses him away. And it's pretty much his strategy for fighting Maestro, because he's not as strong as him nearly, so for that reason he has to go for the zoning technique. But with the direction that Doom had tossed him in, Maestro more or less steered his flight and made his way into Alchemax. But Maestro made it work. I guess he kind of just held his arms out and kind of curled his toes to kind of pan and tilt, you know. But at the end of the day, it worked because he made it to Alchemax, and that's where he wanted to land, and he made it there. And when Doom saw this, like he followed of course, and at first he didn't see him, but then he switched to infrared and he saw this big old Hulk with these little legs running around like one floor down, and he was like, oh yeah, that's him. But initially, like with Doom following Maestro here, he first thought about all the things in this place that he can make use of. But what he didn't account for was Maestro choosing Alchemax, and with doing so, shifting the surroundings to his advantage. So when Doom follows him here, Maestro just pushes a button, which then pulls Doom into these huge electromagnets, which he uses to just strip the armor off of Dr. Doom, reducing him to nothing but Victor in a green robe, which at the end of the day is still Victor, but without his armor, he can't take nearly the amount of damage that he could have going against Maestro. And when Maestro goes for the first hit, which is still a pulled punch to a degree, but if Doom still had his armor on, like he wouldn't have flinched from this. But at this point with Doom not having his armor, Maestro's hearing bones cracking and all that. But when Maestro hits him and he knocks Doom through the wall into the next room, Doom then turns around and looks at Maestro, and Maestro's like, oh my god, your face. Did I just do that just now? Like, man, I was only trying to kill you, man, like your face. I didn't mean to do that. Like, that's crazy. But it's here where Doom tells Maestro that as far as the face disfigurement, he has Reed to thank for that, but at this point when it comes to fighting, like, Doom is done. He thinks one of his legs are broken, so he has to find an exit quick. So then when he makes his way to his mask, because if nothing else, then that's at least his ticket out of there. And when he puts it on, he activates his matter transmitter in order to then move himself somewhere away from Maestro. Anywhere. And it shows Maestro like before this fight had even began. Doom already had his exit strategy, like his contingency was set already. But even with seeing this, like this is one of the things that just has me thinking like Doom, he always has like contingencies built in. Like there's a number of them already in his armor, and at least in the cases where it's actually Doom, because you know half the time it's a Doom bot. But most of the time he has a number of contingencies for many situations, and it really feels like in this instance that this was the quickest one available for him needing to get out as quickly as possible. But after this, we then go back over to the Minister, who's back at Maestro's palace where Doom had just recently settled in, and when we see the Minister wandering around, it seems like he's found the time traveling technology which Doom had used in order to arrive here in the first place. But then after this, we go over to the epilogue, which then takes us to the remains of the former AIM base. And when this happens, we just see this hand pop up from the ground because it's here where the Abomination just crawls his way out from the rubble after being awakened and freed from AIM by that bunker buster missile which was sent by the Pantheon. And this shows us that the Abomination is definitely going to come back in Maestro World War M issue 1, which I can't wait to see, because even with like these different series being like a slow build, but even still with that being the case, like it's fun to see Maestro just kind of level up along the way. And now with the Abomination back, we'll get to see what he thinks of the new and improved base level Hulk. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/DopeSpill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.